August 1st, 1943. Blackett Strait, Solomon Islands, 0230 hours. Commander Katsumori Yamashiro stood on the bridge of the destroyer Amagiri, his binoculars scanning the moonless tropical night as his ship knifed through calm waters at 32 knots. Through the humid darkness, he spotted the distinctive white wake of a small craft, perhaps 70 feet long, bouncing across the wave tops like an insect. "Mosquito boats," he said dismissively to his executive officer, unable to hide his contempt. "The Americans send us plywood toys armed with firecrackers. They might as well throw rocks at battleships." What Yamashiro didn't know, what none of the 8,000 officers serving in the Imperial Japanese Navy's destroyer force could have imagined, was that these despised plywood boats would sink over 30 Japanese warships before war's end, including vessels 10 times their displacement. Within 18 months, these Mosquito boats would transform from objects of ridicule into the most feared nocturnal predators in the Pacific. The mathematics of their lethality were already loaded in those torpedo tubes mounted on wooden decks. Mark 8 torpedoes carrying 466 pounds of TNT, running at 46 knots with a range of 16,000 yards, enough explosive power to break a destroyer's keel with a single hit. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The transformation began that August night when American ingenuity, desperation, and raw courage collided with Japanese overconfidence in waters so dark that combatants couldn't see their enemies until they were alongside each other.
In early 1943, the United States Navy operated the world's only significant fleet of motor torpedo boats, small, fast craft designed for hit-and-run attacks against larger warships. The patrol torpedo boat, universally known as the PT boat, was an 80-foot plywood vessel powered by 3 Packard Marine engines, producing 4,050 combined horsepower. The specifications seemed absurd for a warship. Constructed of laminated mahogany planking over oak frames, the hull was literally made of wood. Maximum armor consisted of light steel plates protecting the helmsman and engines. The crew of 12 to 14 men had no protection except speed, darkness, and luck. Armed with 4 Mark 8 torpedoes, several machine guns, and occasionally a 37mm or 40mm cannon, they were expected to engage steel warships displacing 2,000 tons or more. Lieutenant Commander John Bulkley, commanding Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 3 in the Philippines, had demonstrated the potential of PT boats in early 1942. His boats harassed Japanese invasion forces, evacuated General Douglas MacArthur from Corregidor, and proved that small, fast craft could operate effectively in combat zones. But Bulkley's successes were tactical pinpricks, not strategic victories. The Japanese Navy viewed PT boats as nuisances, not threats. Captain Tamechi Hara, commanding the destroyer Shigure and one of Japan's most experienced naval officers, wrote in his combat diary in March 1943 after encountering PT boats near New Guinea. "These American speedboats are toys piloted by amateurs. They charge at us making enormous wakes that reveal their position miles away. Their torpedoes are launched from such distances that evasion is simple. Their machine gun fire bounces harmlessly off our hulls. They flee at the first sign of return fire. Our lookouts call them mosquitoes because they buzz around annoyingly but pose no real danger. One expects more from American naval technology." The Japanese assessment seemed reasonable based on early encounters. PT boats attacking in daylight or bright moonlight were easily spotted and avoided. Their wooden hulls caught fire readily from incendiary rounds. Their torpedoes, launched from unstable platforms in rough seas, often missed. The casualty rate among PT boat crews in 1942 suggested they were more dangerous to their own crews than to enemy vessels. But a new generation of PT boat commanders was developing tactics specifically designed to exploit the boat's unique characteristics while minimizing their vulnerabilities. These young officers, most in their 20s, understood that traditional naval tactics wouldn't work in plywood boats armed with torpedoes. They needed to create something new.
Lieutenant Roland Westholm, commanding PT-109 before it was reassigned to Lieutenant John F. Kennedy, wrote a tactical manual in June 1943 that would revolutionize PT boat operations. His analysis, based on 32 combat patrols, identified the fundamental principles for PT boat success. We cannot fight like destroyers because we are not destroyers. We are assassins, not warriors. We use darkness, weather, and terrain to approach unseen. We strike from positions where the enemy cannot return effective fire. We launch torpedoes at ranges where they cannot miss. We vanish before the enemy can react. Speed is not our weapon. Invisibility is. The boat that is seen is the boat that dies. Westholm's manual emphasized several revolutionary concepts. First, PT boats should operate on moonless nights or in rain squalls when visibility approached zero. Japanese warships, accustomed to fighting during daylight or bright moonlight, had difficulty spotting small craft in total darkness. Their searchlights, designed to illuminate distant targets, were actually disadvantageous at close range, where they destroyed the operator's night vision. Second, PT boats should approach targets with engines at idle speed to minimize wake and noise. The distinctive rooster tail spray created by boats at high speed was visible for miles on calm nights. By creeping toward targets at 5 to 8 knots, PT boats could close to point-blank range before being detected. Third, torpedo launches should occur at ranges of 500 yards or less, preferably from the target's beam, where evasive turns were impossible. Traditional naval doctrine called for torpedo launches at 2,000 yards or more, but PT boats' unstable platforms made such shots unreliable. At 500 yards, even a maneuvering target couldn't evade torpedoes traveling at 46 knots. Fourth, after launching torpedoes, PT boats should flee, using islands, reefs, and rain squalls for concealment. The critical period immediately after attack was when Japanese destroyers would respond with searchlights and gunfire. PT boats needed predetermined escape routes planned before the attack. These tactics required nerves of steel. Approaching a 2,000-ton destroyer armed with 5-inch guns while riding in a plywood boat demanded courage bordering on recklessness. But commanders who mastered Westholm's techniques discovered they could sink warships that outgunned them 50 to 1. The waters surrounding Guadalcanal had earned the grim nickname Iron Bottom Sound from the dozens of warships sunk during the savage naval battles of late 1942. By August 1943, the strategic situation had shifted. American forces held Guadalcanal and were pushing north through the Solomon Islands. But Japanese destroyers still operated nightly supply runs, evacuating troops and delivering reinforcements in high-speed missions called Tokyo Express or Rat Run by Americans. PT boat squadrons operating from Rendova and Tulagi bases were tasked with interdicting these runs. The missions were extraordinarily dangerous. Japanese destroyers traveled at 35 knots, armed with 6 to 8 5-inch guns, multiple anti-aircraft weapons, and their own torpedoes. A single hit from a 5-inch shell would obliterate a PT boat. The destroyers also carried Type 93 long lance torpedoes, the finest naval torpedoes in the world, with ranges exceeding 20,000 yards. Lieutenant Henry Hank Brantingham, commanding PT-157, led a 4-boat patrol on the night of August 1, 1943, into Blackett Strait. Intelligence reported 4 Japanese destroyers would transit the area around 0200 hours, heading south toward Vila. Brantingham's mission was simple and terrifying: attack the destroyers and sink as many as possible. Brantingham watched the Japanese destroyers pass his position at 1,500 yards, their dark silhouettes barely visible against the black sky. He waited until all 4 vessels had passed, then advanced throttles and turned to parallel their course. The 3 Packard engines roared to life, pushing PT-157 to 40 knots as she closed the range. At 800 yards, a Japanese lookout spotted PT-157's wake phosphorescing in the disturbed water. Searchlights on the trailing destroyer Shigure snapped on, brilliant beams sweeping the darkness. But Brantingham had already reduced speed to idle, allowing his wake to dissipate. The searchlights passed over PT-157 without illuminating her low profile. At 500 yards, Brantingham ordered torpedo launch. 4 Mark 8 torpedoes splashed into the water, their compressed air launch systems making distinctive popping sounds. The weapons ran straight and true toward Hagikaze, the second destroyer in line. Brantingham didn't wait to observe results. He turned hard to starboard and opened throttles, racing toward a small island 2,000 yards distant. Aboard Hagikaze, the torpedo officer spotted wakes approaching from astern. He shouted a warning, but at 500 yards and 46 knots, the torpedoes covered the distance in 24 seconds, far too fast for evasive action. 2 Mark 8s struck Hagikaze on her starboard side, one forward of the bridge, one in the engine room. The explosions lifted the 2,000-ton destroyer bodily from the water. The forward hit detonated the forward magazine, creating a secondary explosion that vaporized the ship's bow. The engine room hit destroyed propulsion and opened the hull to flooding. Hagikaze lost way immediately, settling rapidly by the bow. Commander Shinichi Tokuno, Hagikaze's captain, tried to organize damage control, but the flooding was catastrophic. 6 minutes after the torpedo hits, he ordered abandon ship. Hagikaze sank stern first into 2,000 feet of water, taking 73 of her 240-man crew with her. The remaining 3 Japanese destroyers erupted in chaos. Searchlights swept frantically across the water. 5-inch guns fired at shadows and wakes. Yamashiro ordered his formation to scatter and search for attackers. But the PT boats had vanished into the darkness, concealed by islands and their own minimal radar signatures.
Lieutenant Robert Searles, commanding PT-163, had watched Brantingham's attack from 3,000 yards distant. As the Japanese destroyers separated to search, Searles identified an opportunity. The destroyer Arashi had detached from the formation and was steaming slowly in a search pattern, her searchlights probing the darkness around small islands. Searles crept toward Arashi at idle speed, his boat's engines barely turning over. The Japanese destroyer was so focused on searching the water ahead that no one thought to check astern. At 400 yards, Searles launched 3 torpedoes. His 4th tube had malfunctioned and turned away at full speed. 2 torpedoes struck Arashi amidships, the explosions occurring within seconds of each other. The destroyer's keel broke, her back literally broken by the concentrated blast. She folded in the middle like a closing book and sank in less than 3 minutes. Only 37 survivors were pulled from the water by Amagiri. Commander Kenji Uchino and 203 crew members went down with their ship. Throughout August and September 1943, PT boat squadrons operating in the Solomons sank 11 Japanese destroyers and damaged 8 others severely. The success rate was unprecedented for small craft, and it changed American naval doctrine regarding the employment of torpedo boats. What made PT boats suddenly effective after a year of limited success? The answer was tactical maturity, combined with operational conditions that favored their strengths while minimizing their weaknesses. First, the pitch-black tropical nights in the Solomons provided concealment that was impossible to achieve in other theaters. European waters, with their longer twilight periods and frequent moonlight, didn't offer the same cover. Pacific commanders learned to schedule operations during the darkest nights each month. Second, the confined waters around islands and reefs channeled Japanese warships into predictable routes. PT boats could establish ambush positions with reasonable certainty that targets would appear. In open ocean, finding enemy ships was nearly impossible for boats with limited range and no long-range radar. Third, and perhaps most important, PT boat crews developed the aggressive mentality necessary for their mission. Early commanders had approached destroyers cautiously, launching torpedoes at maximum range and fleeing at the first sign of opposition. The new generation of commanders understood that survival required getting close enough to guarantee hits than escaping using speed and concealment. Lieutenant Commander Robert Leeson, commanding Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 9, wrote in his after-action report from September 1943, "PT boat tactics are the opposite of conventional naval warfare. We seek the closest possible range rather than standoff distance. We prefer darkness and weather that reduces visibility. We attack individually rather than in formation. We rely on speed to escape rather than armor to survive. Every principle of surface combat learned at Annapolis must be discarded. This is knife fighting, not artillery dueling."
As PT boat tactics matured, so did the boats themselves. The Elco 80-foot PT boats that entered service in late 1943 incorporated lessons learned from 2 years of combat. The later models featured improved radar that could detect destroyers at 10,000 yards and track them continuously. This allowed PT boats to vector toward targets while remaining invisible themselves. The Mark 13 torpedo began replacing the older Mark 8 in early 1944. The new weapon carried a larger warhead, 600 pounds of Torpex explosive versus 466 pounds of TNT, and featured improved depth-keeping and guidance systems. More importantly, it could be launched from the moving, unstable PT boat platform with greater reliability. Armament increased dramatically. Early PT boats carried .50 caliber machine guns and perhaps a 20mm cannon. Late war boats mounted up to 8 .50 caliber guns, a 37mm automatic cannon, and sometimes a 40mm Bofors gun. This firepower, while inadequate to sink destroyers, proved devastating against Japanese barges, landing craft, and patrol boats. Some boats received smoke generators that could lay thick screening smoke in minutes, providing concealment during daylight operations or when caught by searchlights. The smoke proved effective at disrupting enemy fire control and allowing PT boats to escape from superior forces. Engines were constantly upgraded. The later models used Packard 5M 2500 engines producing 1,850 horsepower each, giving 3-engine boats over 5,500 total horsepower. Top speed increased from 40 to 45 knots, critical when fleeing from destroyer gunfire. The boats also received primitive electronic countermeasures. Tinsel, strips of aluminum dropped in the water, created false radar returns that confused Japanese fire control radar. While not as sophisticated as later ECM systems, tinsel proved effective at disrupting enemy tracking during night actions.
The most effective counter tactic was simply maintaining high speed and erratic courses. A destroyer steaming at 35 knots in a zigzag pattern was difficult for PT boats to intercept. The American boats had to predict where the destroyer would be when torpedoes arrived 30 to 40 seconds after launch. A maneuvering target made this calculation nearly impossible. Commander Tsutomu Maeda, commanding the destroyer Yamagumo, survived 3 PT boat attacks in October 1943 using aggressive maneuvers. His report detailed the tactics. When radar or lookouts detect small craft, immediately increase to maximum speed and begin random course changes every 30 seconds. Order all searchlights and guns to open fire toward detected contacts. Maintain fire even without visible targets. The gun flashes and splash patterns disrupt enemy aim and reveal their positions. If torpedoes are launched, turn bow on to present minimum target and allow maximum time for evasion. These tactics saved Yamagumo 3 times. As American forces prepared to invade the Philippines in October 1944, PT boat squadrons received new missions beyond destroyer hunting. They would provide close support for amphibious landings, patrol coastal waters to prevent Japanese reinforcement, and attack supply barges that sustained isolated enemy garrisons. The Battle of Surigao Strait on October 25, 1944, showcased PT boats operating in their intended role as part of a coordinated naval defense. 39 PT boats from multiple squadrons established patrol lines in Surigao Strait as Japanese surface forces attempted to reach the invasion beaches at Leyte Gulf. The Japanese formation included 2 battleships, 1 heavy cruiser, and 4 destroyers. overwhelming firepower against plywood boats armed with torpedoes. But the PT boats weren't expected to sink battleships. Their mission was to slow the Japanese advance, report enemy positions, and harass the formation until heavier American forces could engage. Throughout the night of October 24–25, PT boats made repeated torpedo attacks against the Japanese column. They scored no battleship kills. Battleships were simply too large and too well armored for single torpedo hits to sink, but they achieved their mission objectives. The constant attacks forced the Japanese formation to maneuver defensively, reducing their speed from 25 knots to 15 knots. The PT boats radioed continuous position reports, allowing American battleships and cruisers at the north end of the strait to prepare for action. Lieutenant Harley Thronson, commanding PT 523, made 3 separate attack runs against the battleship Yamashiro. His torpedoes missed, but his radio reports gave American commanders exact information on Japanese speed, course, and formation. More importantly, his attacks forced Yamashiro to maneuver erratically, disrupting her advance.
In August 1943, Commander Katsumori Yamashiro had dismissed PT boats as Mosquitoes, annoying but harmless toys that posed no threat to real warships. By September 1943, Yamashiro was dead, killed when his destroyer, Amagiri, was torpedoed by PT-109 in a night action near Kolumbangara. The boat he had mocked sank his ship with 2 torpedo hits that broke Amagiri's keel and sent her to the bottom in 4 minutes. The transformation from ridicule to respect happened quickly in the Pacific War. Japanese destroyer commanders learned that plywood boats crewed by determined Americans could sink steel warships through superior tactics, aggressive execution, and technological advantages in radar and torpedoes. The lessons were learned in blood and burning oil, in sinking ships and drowning sailors. At the Naval War College after the war, a symposium on PT boat operations attracted Japanese naval officers eager to understand how such small craft had proven so effective. Captain Tameichi Hara, one of the few destroyer commanders to survive the war, provided the Japanese perspective with painful honesty. "We underestimated them completely. We saw plywood boats and assumed they were insignificant. We dismissed their commanders as amateurs playing at warfare. We thought our superior size, armor, and guns made us invincible. We were catastrophically wrong. The Americans understood something we didn't. In darkness, size is irrelevant. Speed matters more than armor. A single torpedo hit sinks any ship. They turned our strength into weaknesses, and their weaknesses into strengths. That's not luck. That's superior tactical thinking. We paid for our arrogance with 38 destroyers and thousands of lives." The PT boat story is ultimately about asymmetric warfare, using unconventional weapons and tactics to defeat conventional forces. The Japanese Navy never expected PT boats to sink destroyers because such an outcome seemed impossible. But American commanders understood that impossible just meant no one had done it yet. They created tactics, refined techniques, and pressed home attacks with a courage that overcame enormous odds. By war's end, Japanese destroyers traveling through waters where PT boats operated did so with fear and elaborate precautions. The Mosquitoes had become wolves, and the hunters had become the hunted. While PT boat attacks on destroyers captured headlines and earned decorations, the unglamorous business of hunting Japanese supply barges became their primary mission from late 1943 onward. The Imperial Japanese Army, bypassed by American advances, relied on coastal barges to move troops, supplies, and ammunition between isolated garrisons. These steel-hulled craft, typically 50 to 100 feet long, traveled at night, hugging coastlines to avoid air attack. PT boats proved ideally suited for barge hunting. Their shallow draft allowed operation in coastal waters too confined for destroyers. Their speed let them overtake fleeing barges. Their machine gun and cannon armament was devastating against unarmored targets. Between November 1943 and August 1945, PT boats sank over 1,500 Japanese barges, starving isolated garrisons and crippling enemy logistics. Lieutenant Commander Alvin Cluster, commanding Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 7 in New Guinea, developed systematic barge hunting tactics. His boats operated in pairs, one equipped with radar to detect barges at long range, the second carrying extra ammunition for sustained gun battles. They patrolled known barge routes nightly, establishing ambush positions near points where barges had to pass close to shore. The barge hunters faced different challenges than destroyer attackers. Japanese barges carried 20mm or 25mm automatic cannon and machine guns, creating fierce return fire at close range. Some barges were armored with steel plates that resisted .50 caliber fire. Coastal artillery batteries protected key routes, engaging PT boats that ventured too close to shore. The fighting was intense, continuous, and brutal. Ensign Herbert Knight, commanding PT-191, described a typical barge action off the New Guinea coast in January 1944. We detected 3 barges at 4,000 yards, proceeding south along the coast. Closed to 800 yards and opened fire with all guns. The barges returned fire immediately, heavy volume from multiple weapons. Tracer fire crisscrossed the water like something from hell. We poured fire into the lead barge until it exploded, probably an ammunition cargo. The second barge ran aground trying to escape. We raked it with machine gun fire until it was ablaze. The third barge turned and fled north. We pursued at high speed and destroyed it with 37mm cannon fire. Total time from contact to last barge destroyed, 18 minutes. We expended 12,000 rounds of .50 caliber, 200 rounds of 37mm. We took 14 hits to our hull and superstructure. 1 crewman wounded by shrapnel.
Japanese garrisons at Rabaul, Wewak, and dozens of smaller outposts were slowly strangled by PT boat interdiction. Food supplies dwindled, ammunition ran short. Reinforcements couldn't arrive. Medical supplies became critically scarce. The psychological effect on isolated Japanese troops was devastating. They could hear the PT boat engines every night, knowing more supplies were being destroyed, knowing relief would never come. Major General Hatazo Adachi, commanding the Japanese 18th Army in New Guinea, wrote in his diary in March 1944 about the situation. Our supply lines are severed. American torpedo boats destroy every barge we send. Our men are starving. We have ammunition for perhaps 2 more weeks of combat. Medical supplies are exhausted. The enemy doesn't need to attack us. They simply wait while we die slowly. These small boats are more effective than their bombers or their infantry. They have made continued resistance impossible. As the Pacific War turned decisively against Japan in 1944, PT boats faced a new and terrifying threat: kamikaze attacks. Japanese commanders, desperate to stop American advances, employed suicide tactics against all types of vessels, including the small patrol boats. Kamikaze aircraft targeting PT boats presented unique challenges. The boats' small size made them difficult targets for diving aircraft, but their wooden construction meant a single bomb or crashing aircraft could destroy them completely. Their lack of armor-piercing anti-aircraft weapons made shooting down kamikazes problematic. On December 7, 1944, PT boats operating near Mindoro in the Philippines experienced their first concentrated kamikaze attack. 15 Japanese aircraft attacked a formation of 8 PT boats, providing anti-submarine patrol for invasion forces. The boats' combined machine gun fire was intense, but largely ineffective against aircraft deliberately flying into the gunfire. Lieutenant Malcolm Bowling, commanding PT-230, watched in horror as a Zero fighter dove directly at his boat, despite taking dozens of .50 caliber hits. The Zero came straight down, trailing smoke and fire. We poured everything into him. I could see pieces flying off the aircraft, but he kept coming. At the last second, he pulled up slightly and crashed into the water 50 feet ahead of us. The explosion threw a wall of water over our bow. Had he not pulled up at the end, he would have destroyed us.
3 PT boats were damaged in that attack, one seriously enough to require towing back to base. But PT boat crews learned quickly. They adopted evasive maneuvers used by destroyers, steaming at high speed in random zigzag patterns. They concentrated fire on attacking aircraft rather than dispersing it. Most importantly, they used smoke generators to create screening clouds that broke enemy targeting. The effectiveness of these defensive measures showed in the statistics. Despite hundreds of kamikaze attacks on PT boats between October 1944 and August 1945, only 7 boats were sunk by suicide aircraft, another 12 damaged beyond repair. The small size that made PT boats vulnerable also made them difficult targets. A kamikaze pilot had one chance to hit, and hitting an 80-foot boat traveling at 40 knots in a zigzag pattern while being shot at by multiple machine guns proved extraordinarily difficult. During the Philippines campaign from October 1944 through July 1945, PT boat squadrons operated continuously in support of amphibious operations. They patrolled invasion beaches, hunted submarines, destroyed supply barges, rescued downed aircrew, and engaged in countless small actions that never made official histories but were critical to operational success. The rescue missions represented some of the most dangerous PT boat operations. Recovering downed aircrew from behind enemy lines required penetrating Japanese-controlled waters, often in daylight, locating survivors and extracting them under fire. PT boats rescued over 500 Allied aircrew during the Philippines campaign, flying in the face of enemy opposition. Lieutenant John McPhelfrish, commanding PT-489, conducted one of the most celebrated rescue missions on January 12, 1945. An Army Air Force B-25 bomber was shot down near Corregidor during a raid. The crew of 6 parachuted into Manila Bay, 5 miles from Japanese-held shore batteries. McPhelfrish received the rescue mission at 1400 hours, with instructions to recover the aircrew before dark. PT-489 proceeded at high speed into Manila Bay in broad daylight, fully exposed to Japanese observation. Shore batteries opened fire at 4,000 yards, throwing up enormous splashes around the racing boat. McPhelfrish zigzagged violently while maintaining course toward the survivors' last reported position. At 1445 hours, lookouts spotted survivors in the water. McPhelfrish slowed to pick them up while shore batteries adjusted their fire. Shells landed within 100 yards, shrapnel whistling overhead. The crew pulled all 6 aircrew aboard in 3 minutes, then fled at maximum speed while Japanese guns pursued them with fire. McPhelfrish's after-action report was characteristically understated. Retrieved 6 Army aircrew from Manila Bay under enemy fire. Received no damage despite approximately 40 rounds fired at us by shore batteries. All rescued personnel in good condition except minor injuries from parachute landing. Total time in enemy waters, 27 minutes. The rescued B-25 pilot, Captain Robert Stevenson, wrote a letter to McPhelfrish's commanding officer that captured what these rescues meant to aircrew. Lieutenant McPhelfrish and his crew saved our lives without hesitation, sailing into enemy-controlled waters in broad daylight to get us out. They were being shot at by shore batteries that could have sunk them with a single hit. They never wavered, never considered leaving us. That kind of courage is beyond my ability to describe. Every man aboard that PT boat is a hero. PT boats operating off the China coast from bases in Chongqing faced unique challenges. The waterways were shallow, muddy, and constantly changing. Japanese shore batteries were thick and well coordinated. Enemy aircraft were more numerous than in other theaters. Yet PT boats operating in this environment achieved remarkable success, disrupting Japanese logistics. Lieutenant Commander Davis Levy, commanding Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 5 in China, developed tactics specifically for riverine operations. His boats operated in flights of 4, providing mutual fire support. They attacked at dawn or dusk when visibility limited Japanese air response but allowed PT boat navigation. They used the river's twisting channels and islands for concealment, appearing suddenly to attack, then vanishing before enemy forces could respond. The China coast operations demonstrated PT boat versatility. These were not the fast, sleek attacks on destroyers in open water. They were grinding campaigns against barges, junks, and small craft, interspersed with occasional encounters with larger vessels. The cumulative effect was devastating to Japanese logistics. Between February and August 1945, PT boats operating from China bases destroyed over 300 vessels, ranging from barges to coastal freighters. They cut supply lines to isolated Japanese garrisons, interdicted troop movements, and generally made Japanese waterborne movement impossible during daylight and dangerous at night. The cost was significant. PT boats operating in China suffered higher casualty rates than squadrons elsewhere. The confined waters limited maneuver options. Shore batteries were deadly. Japanese air attacks were frequent, but the strategic impact justified the cost. Entire Japanese armies in China were immobilized by lack of supplies, unable to respond to Chinese offensives.
As the war entered its final phase in summer 1945, PT boats found themselves with diminishing targets. Japanese naval forces had been largely destroyed. Surface combatants avoided waters where PT boats operated. The barge traffic that sustained isolated garrisons had dwindled to almost nothing. PT boat squadrons shifted to new missions. Some boats became harbor patrol craft, protecting American anchorages from submarines and suicide attacks. Others became rescue boats, stationed along aircraft routes to recover ditched air crews. Still others became courier boats, carrying dispatches and personnel between bases. The monotony of these missions was broken occasionally by combat. Japanese submarines attempting to infiltrate American anchorages encountered PT boat patrols. Suicide boats launched desperate attacks. Occasional destroyers or cruisers emerged from hiding for futile attacks on American forces. On August 10, 1945, just days before Japan's surrender, PT-380, commanded by Lieutenant Raymond Wagner, engaged what proved to be one of the last Japanese destroyers at sea. The destroyer Sakura was attempting to reach a surrender port when Wagner detected her on radar at 8,000 yards. Wagner closed to 1,200 yards before being detected, launched 4 torpedoes, and scored 2 hits that left Sakura dead in the water. Wagner's combat report, filed on August 11th, noted the irony. Engaged and disabled Japanese destroyer with torpedo attack. Enemy returned fire half-heartedly, as if they knew the war was over, but felt obligated to maintain appearances. We did not press the attack after achieving disabling hits. The destroyer's crew abandoned ship in good order, and we recovered survivors. Many expressed relief that the war was ending. This is a strange way for the fighting to conclude. When Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, 144 PT boats were operating in the Pacific. They had traveled millions of miles, fired billions of rounds of ammunition, launched thousands of torpedoes, and engaged in countless actions, ranging from major battles to forgotten skirmishes. Their crews had earned 26 Navy Crosses, hundreds of Silver Stars, and thousands of Bronze Stars and other decorations. Behind the statistics and battle reports were individual stories of courage, sacrifice, and survival. PT boat crews were predominantly young men, average age 22, who had volunteered for hazardous duty without fully understanding what they were accepting. Seaman First Class Donald Harper, a machine gunner aboard PT-147, wrote letters home that were published after the war by his family. His April 1944 letter captures the reality of PT boat service. "Mom, I can't tell you where we are or what we're doing, but I can say it's exciting and terrifying in equal measure. Every night we go out hunting, and every night someone might not come back. Last week we lost PT-109 and all her crew. We found wreckage the next morning. No survivors, just debris and oil. That could be us any night.
But we keep going out because someone has to do this job, and we're the ones who volunteered. Harper survived the war and returned home in October 1945. Thousands of others didn't. The casualty rate among PT boat crews exceeded 15%, higher than most naval services. The small boats offered no protection. When they were hit, they burned or exploded. Survival often depended on luck rather than skill or equipment. The psychological impact on survivors was significant. Many PT boat veterans suffered what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, though the condition wasn't diagnosed or treated in 1945. The nightly combat, constant danger, and loss of friends created mental health challenges that lasted decades. Lieutenant John Searles, who survived 37 combat patrols, later described the psychological burden in a 1982 interview. "You never really left the war. 50 years later, I still have nightmares about burning boats and friends screaming in the water. I hear PT boat engines in my sleep. Every loud noise makes me flinch. That's the cost of war that doesn't show up in casualty statistics. We all came home damaged in ways that couldn't be seen." The debate over PT boat effectiveness began even before the war ended. Some naval officers argued they were resources poorly spent, that destroyers or submarines could have achieved better results with the same investment. Others maintained PT boats filled a unique niche that no other vessel could occupy. The Naval War College conducted a comprehensive study in 1946, analyzing PT boat contributions. The findings were mixed, but generally positive. PT boats had sunk 38 destroyers, a significant achievement, but at a cost of 69 boats lost. The exchange ratio favored the Americans, but wasn't overwhelming. More impressive was the barge war statistics. PT boats destroyed over 1,500 Japanese supply craft, crippling enemy logistics throughout the Pacific. No other weapon system achieved comparable results against this target set. The study concluded that barge hunting alone justified the PT boat program. The rescue missions provided another clear justification. PT boats recovered over 500 Allied aircrew from behind enemy lines, often under fire. Each rescued pilot represented years of training and combat experience. The value of these rescues, while impossible to quantify precisely, was clearly significant. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding the Fifth Fleet, provided perhaps the most balanced assessment in his post-war report. PT boats were neither the war-winning weapons some claimed, nor the wasteful toys others suggested. They were specialized craft that performed specialized missions with reasonable effectiveness. In confined waters at night, they were excellent. In open ocean during daylight, they were vulnerable. The key was employing them appropriately, which we learned to do as the war progressed.
In 1960, a reunion of PT boat veterans and Japanese destroyer survivors was held in Tokyo. Former enemies met as friends, sharing experiences from different perspectives. The conversations revealed how completely the American boats had changed Japanese attitudes. Captain Kenji Matsumoto, who had survived 2 PT boat attacks while commanding the destroyer Isonami, spoke candidly about the Japanese experience. "We began the war thinking PT boats were toys. We learned they were deadly weapons. What impressed us most was not their technology, which was good but not revolutionary. It was the tactics and courage of their crews. They attacked warships that could sink them with a single shell, attacking from ranges where they couldn't miss. That requires a special kind of bravery. We respected them as warriors, even as we feared them as enemies." Lieutenant Commander Alvin Cluster, representing the American PT boat veterans, responded with equal honesty. "We knew we were in plywood boats attacking steel ships. We knew the odds were against us, but someone had to do it, and we had the tools for the job. The Japanese Navy was formidable. Their ships were excellent. Their crews were skilled. We didn't beat them through superior technology or numbers. We beat them through tactics that exploited their weaknesses and by pressing home attacks regardless of risk. That's not special. That's just doing the job we were assigned." In August 1943, Commander Katsumori Yamashiro had dismissed PT boats as mosquitoes, insignificant pests that posed no real threat to the Imperial Japanese Navy's powerful destroyers. 4 weeks later, Yamashiro was dead. His destroyer, Amagiri, sunk by the plywood boat he had mocked. The transformation from contempt to respect happened with brutal speed, measured in sinking ships,
and drowning sailors. The PT boat story is ultimately about asymmetric warfare, using unconventional weapons to defeat conventional forces through superior tactics and aggressive execution. Japanese destroyers had every advantage: size, armor, firepower, speed, and range. Yet American PT boats sank them regularly because the PT boat crews understood something fundamental. Advantages only matter if you can bring them to bear. In darkness, at close range, with surprise, most conventional advantages became irrelevant. At the PT Boat Museum in Fall River, Massachusetts, a restored Elko 80-footer sits among other maritime artifacts. Visitors marvel at its small size, its wooden construction, its apparently inadequate armament. Museum guides explain how these fragile craft sank destroyers, and visitors struggle to believe it. On the museum wall hangs a plaque with a quote from a captured Japanese destroyer officer, recorded during interrogation in 1944. His words captured the complete reversal of Japanese attitudes toward PT boats. "We laughed when we first encountered them. Wooden boats attacking steel warships, it seemed absurd. Then they sank our destroyers. Then they sank more destroyers. Then we stopped laughing and started fearing. Every night in waters where these boats operated, we feared. Darkness that once protected us became our enemy because that's when they attacked. We never saw them until too late. We never heard them until torpedoes struck. They transformed from toys into nightmares. That's not luck. That's superior tactics combined with courage we didn't expect from men in wooden boats. They earned our respect the hard way, by defeating us repeatedly when we thought we were invincible." The Japanese Navy never expected PT boats to sink destroyers. By war's end, they had learned that expectation mattered less than reality, and the reality was that plywood boats, crewed by determined Americans, could destroy steel warships through tactics that turned weakness into strength. The Mosquitoes had proven themselves wolves, and the lessons written in oil slicks and burning metal would influence naval warfare for generations to come.